Alrighty, we have reached exam 4 material. This is chapter 13 on social psychology, which is Dr. Lawrence's specialty. So we're going to break this up into 2 sessions and make sure we put a lot of attention on it. Chapter 15 will also be broken up into 2 pieces just because it's so long and it's about disorders, which is extremely interesting. So we'll go ahead and get started today with the first half of social psychology. All right. So the first thing we want to talk about is attribution theory, and really all that you need to know about attribution theory is that it says we explain behavior by crediting that behavior to one of 2 sources, either the situation or the person's disposition. The situation or the disposition. And next to disposition, you can write the word character. A person's character is what you're talking about when you're talking about disposition. So let's say that normally, when you come into class, if you don't have a piece of paper or a pencil, you'll ask the girl sitting next to you if you can borrow one, right? And normally she lets you. But today you forgot your pencil and you asked her to borrow one, and she throws it at you and says, why don't you come to class more prepared next time, right? So immediately you're going to make an attribution, and an attribution is just an explanation of someone's behavior, essentially. And so you're going to make an attribution. You're going to say either it's the situation, something happened to my friend today that's making her act this way, something bad must have happened that upset her for her to do this, or you're going to credit her disposition, and you're going to say, man, this girl is really rude, like she was just faking being nice before, she's just a rude person. Right? So see how explaining that behavior can make you have 2 very different attitudes about this person. Either you feel bad about them bad for them because you assume they've gone through some kind of experience or situation that hurt them, or you're saying this person is a piece of trash, right? And so that's what the fundamental attribution error is speaking to. Next to fundamental attribution error, write down underestimating the situation, overestimating a person's character. And really, in particular, a person's character flaws, usually. You are underestimating the situation, overestimating a person's disposition or their character. And so that's kind of why we call it the fundamental attribution error, is because you are fundamentally making an incorrect attribution. You are thinking that to explain someone's bad behavior, it's because of who they are. It's a fundamental error with who they are as a person, not an issue with the situation affecting their behavior. Okay. Some factors that affect our attributions. In individualist cultures, they're more likely to make the fundamental attribution error and to attribute behavior to people's personal traits, because we think so typically in terms of ourselves and our own decisions and being responsible for the things that we do. And so from that lens, we then look at other people's actions and assume that they are personally responsible for them. Whereas in collectivist cultures, they're more sensitive to the power of the situation. And that's mostly because in collectivist cultures, we place a high value on keeping peace and harmony, right? And so in order to do that, it's better to explain people's bad behavior by attributing it to the situation, because then you don't have contention or disharmony with a person, because it's, about who they are. It's about the situation instead. And then when we explain our own behavior, this would be a self-serving bias. When we explain our own behavior, we're likely to state situational factors that influenced us. I was late to class because my alarm didn't ring, or my cat knocked something over and I had to pick it up, or whatever, right? We're rarely going to say, I'm late because I slept in. I'm late because I stayed up too late last night and I didn't get up this morning, right? Versus when we're explaining other people's behavior, we're also going to be more sensitive to situational influences when it comes to people that we know really well. So when we've seen someone in a variety of different situations, we can tell when a situation is impacting them more than just who they are as a person, because we know that in other similar circumstances, they haven't reacted in such an extreme way or something like that. But if it's a stranger, we are so likely to make the fundamental attribution error. If it's a stranger, if you don't know them, you assume it's their problem, their fault. Okay, so then we've got peripheral route persuasion and central route persuasion. And so next to peripheral route persuasion, write down influenced by unimportant or irrelevant details. being influenced by unimportant or irrelevant details. And so let's say you're going to listen to a couple different candidates give a speech, right? And afterward, you're asked to evaluate how they did in their speeches. And you rate the more attractive speaker higher. That would be a peripheral route persuasion. You were persuaded by something that had nothing to do with the argument they were making, but instead by some irrelevant or unimportant detail, like how attractive or how confident or how much education that speaker had, and that influenced your perception. So, outside forces not relevant to the argument. Examples: you think the person speaking is intelligent because they went to Harvard. You're influenced by how nice the speaker seems. And these things persuade your actions. You'll likely vote for the more likable candidate, even if the other one had the stronger arguments. So peripheral route persuasion, influenced by unimportant or irrelevant details. Whereas central route is, write this down next to that, influenced by the facts. Influenced by the facts and the arguments. So central route persuasion, we're focusing on the arguments and the relevant points about them. We're listening closely to both sides and are being swayed by the most well-stated and evidenced claims, using critical thinking, essentially. And then we have the foot in the door phenomenon. And this one is represented in so many different places all throughout the world and all throughout different topics of study, especially within psychology. But the foot in the door phenomenon is just the idea that once we agree to a small request, we are more and more likely to keep agreeing to larger requests. As soon as someone gets their foot in the door, they just keep inching it open until they're all the way into your house, essentially is the idea here. So for example, if you ask a person for $5 and then they agree to that, they're now more likely to agree to give you $20 the next time you ask, even if you would have asked them for $20 and they would have turned you down. If you then ask for $5 and they accept it, then the next time you ask for $20, they're astronomically more likely to agree. So it's kind of interesting. This can be used for good or evil, and it's had both benefits and consequences throughout history. So on the bad side of that, corrupt authoritarian governments have used this to essentially brainwash their citizens and accomplish harmful goals like genocides. So if you think about something as, drastic and dramatic as the Holocaust, certainly you think people know that what happened during the Holocaust was bad, and not just any, civilian would agree to engage in genocidal behavior. But it really is, with the foot in the door phenomenon, pretty easy to get people to comply just a little bit more until they're doing really harmful, dangerous things. So, the way that this could have played out in the Holocaust would be like someone would be asked to do paperwork for concentration camps. Oh, you don't have to talk to anyone. You don't have to look at anyone. You don't have to, we just want you sitting in an office keeping records, paperwork, right? And then after a little while, they ask that person, to do something a little more. Oh, we just want you to patrol the cafeteria when they're eating. We just want you to do some minimal security, something like that. They do that for a little while, and then pretty soon they're asking you, to actually commit the murders of turning on the gas chamber or something like that. So we've seen this go, really bad ways. Once you start getting people to agree to small acts of deviance, you can kind of brainwash them into criminality. But on the good end of it, this is something that helped end segregation and decrease racial prejudice in the U.S. So once we started making even tiny movements towards civil rights, then it's easier and easier to get more progressive platforms pushed through. We had the Civil Rights Act passed. More and more people began publicly expressing small decreases in their prejudicial attitudes, and they began fighting harder and harder for equal rights. So this influenced other people to come together and join the cause as well. Okay. So a role is just like a set of expectations about some kind of social position. So we have a role in our minds of a CEO. That's someone who should be organized and dedicated and dominant, right? We have a role that we expect of a typical teacher. Oh, that's someone who should be kind-hearted and intelligent and have a liking for kids, for example. But in any case, roles can also be, things like just any kind of social position at all. It doesn't necessarily have to be a job, but being like a college student or, something of that nature, being a mom, being a wife, something like that. And so when you adopt a new role, you might modify your behaviors the way that you feel is the proper way to fit in to that role that you just took on. So if you think that college students are typically a certain kind of way, or wives, married people are a certain kind of way, or secretaries are a certain kind of way, you might adjust your behavior to fit in with the way that that looks or feels to you. And then the Stanford Prison Experiment, if you're a psych major, you'll see this come up over and over and over again. This is one of the most important studies in all of history for psychology. So the Stanford Prison Experiment was supposed to go on for 2 weeks, but they had to cut it short after just like 4 or 5 days because things got way too intense. And so essentially what happened was a bunch of students from Stanford volunteered to be in this study, and they randomly assigned those students to either being a prison guard or being a prisoner, a criminal. And so they staged a whole fake arrest, and they brought all these boys down to a basement laboratory within Stanford Prison, and they instructed the prison guards to, reprimand the prisoners when they would misbehave and have them engage in sort of degrading activities to work off their disobedience and things like that. And people actually started to get really psychologically disturbed, particularly the prisoners, and the prison guards all coalesced against them and started to harass and abuse them, which is why the study had to get called off. And so what I want you to write down is this: the Stanford Prison Experiment showed the power of role-playing, on attitudes and behavior. The Stanford Prison Experiment showed the power of role-playing on attitudes and behavior. So people got so involved in the roles that they were taking on, being a prison guard or being a prisoner, that they actually changed their attitudes and their behaviors in response to that feeling. So the prisoners started to feel discontent with themselves, started to feel like they were a bad person, even though they had done nothing to actually land themselves in a prison. And the prison guards actually started to view the prisoners as sort of less than human, as just horrible, disgusting people, a little bit. And so the Stanford Prison Experiment showed the power of role-playing on attitudes and behavior. Even just putting people into fake roles that they know are fake, it can still change their attitudes and their behaviors permanently. So that's an important concept to take away. And then cognitive dissonance theory, Dr. Lawrence loves to hammer on cognitive dissonance theory. And here's what it comes down to. When your attitudes and your actions do not match up, we change our attitudes way more easily and way more frequently than we change our actions. When our attitudes and our actions do not match up, we are more likely to change our attitudes, not change our actions. And that's just because changing your attitude is so much easier to do than changing your actions. So let's say, the topic is giving blood, and you ask someone, hey, is it a good thing to give blood? Like, what are your thoughts on giving blood? Right? And they're like, well, of course it's a good thing to give blood. People need to give blood because other people need blood transfusions to heal from, injuries they could die from. Of course people should give blood. Everyone should give blood, right? But then I actually ask you to take a needle in your arm and give blood yourself, and you are terrified of that, right? So my attitude, giving blood is great, everyone should do that, and my actions, actually not being willing to give blood myself, do not match up, and this causes dissonance, which is just like distress, confusion, opposition inside of your brain. And we need to adjust either our attitudes or our actions to be consistent and to feel better. So we change our attitudes. So because I don't want to change my action and actually donate blood because that's scary, instead I'm going to say, well, it's actually not that important to donate blood. There are enough people out there already who are doing it, it's not a big deal, right? So that's cognitive dissonance theory. Attitudes and actions do not match up, so we change the attitude. We do not change the action, rarely. Okay. So kind of some additional terms. We've got the chameleon effect, and then that is just when people copy the behaviors of others, and it's often not something that you're choosing to do. It's just something that we do naturally. And this is because of mirror neurons, if you remember talking about those in, I think, the memory chapter or the learning chapter. But examples, yawning. When you see someone else yawn, it's hard to resist the urge to yawn as well. The same thing happens if you see someone like scratch a certain part of their body. It makes you want to scratch that part of your body too. Checking your phone, crossing your legs, things like that. So this is copying the behaviors of other people, the chameleon effect. Mood contagion is when people take on the emotional tones of the people around them. We're likely to catch the moods of the people that we're around. So if you walked in to a church and they were having a church service, you'd probably feel pretty fine, normal, right? Like, you know how to act in that kind of situation usually. But let's say you walked into a church and there was a funeral going on. Even though you have no idea who this person was that died, you are affected by the mood in the room. You are affected by how many people are in there experiencing hurt and pain and sadness. Maybe you're affected by a speaker that's talking about the person who died. Maybe you're affected by seeing photos of the person who died, right? But either way, whatever the mood is in the room, you sort of catch that. If you walked into a church and there was a wedding happening, maybe you feel extra happy because this is a joyous occasion for most of the people in the room. But it's like that, just that whatever kind of energy is in the room, you can pick up on and you catch that mood as well. Which then leads to mood linkage, where everyone in one given situation or arena is experiencing the same mood or attitude altogether. So mood contagion is really just the process that leads you to mood linkage. And then positive herding is the phenomenon that positivity generates more positivity from others within a social network. So if even one person sets out to be optimistic, you can encourage other people to respond optimistically, positively as well. And then conformity all has to do with adjusting our behavior to match some kind of group standard. Even if we don't personally believe it ourselves, we adjust so that we can fit in. Conformity is all about fitting in. And so you need to associate Ash's line study with conformity. Ash's line study with conformity. And so this was the conformity experiment. So there was a series of lines to the right, lines A, B, and C. And then there's initial line, which exists here on the left. And the question is, which of these lines, A, B, or C, matches this first line given? And so there were 5 members in this group of people who were being asked. 4 of those members were Confederates. And a Confederate is someone who is in on the study and knows what's happening, and they've been instructed to act in some kind of way. And then there's 1 randomly selected volunteer. So we're not actually interested in what all 5 people have to say. We are only interested in what the 1 randomly selected volunteer has to say, not the 4 Confederates. So if we bring in these 2 cards, essentially, and we show this line, and then we ask the question, which of these 3 lines matches that line? And all of the 4 Confederates say line B, and now we get to our 1 randomly selected volunteer. They don't know what to do, right? Because they're like, I'm pretty sure that my eyes don't deceive me, and that the line that matches this line over here is line A. But you get so concerned by being the person who disagrees that you conform. And so most of the time, not most of the time, but a third of the time rather, the volunteers would conform and would say whatever the Confederates had said. They wouldn't actually go with what they thought was correct. They would just go with what the group said because they didn't want to be the lone person to stand out. That's the main point. Okay. I know this is a lot of points, although there are a lot of test questions that get asked about what makes it most likely for people to conform and also what makes it most likely for people to obey. And we'll get to obedience in just a minute. But do kind of know these reasons. It's frequent that you see a test question asking about conditions where people are most likely to conform. And those conditions are when they feel incompetent or insecure. So if you feel incompetent, you think, well, these people probably know better than I do, so I'll just go with whatever they say. Number 2, being in a group with 3 or more people, because that just creates a clear majority against you. Being in a group in which everyone else disagrees, being in a group in which everyone else agrees, and you're the one person who disagrees, you feel ganged up on. But if even just one other person disagrees, the odds of our disagreeing greatly increase. We just need one person to latch onto who shares our beliefs to feel comforted. But if everyone else is against us, we usually conform. If you admire the group's status and attractiveness, so you want to impress them, you want to be a part of what they are. If you've not made a prior commitment to any response. So if before they brought you into that panel of 5 people, they asked you individually which line matched up, and you gave your answer of A, now when you go into that panel, even if everyone disagrees, you feel like you have to give the answer that you previously gave in order to be consistent, because you don't know who's watching. And then that leads to the next one, knowing that others in the group are going to observe their behavior. That makes us want to conform as well, versus if we were asked in private to give a response after they had made theirs. And then lastly, being from a culture that strongly encourages respect for social standards, so usually collectivist cultures. Next, we've got normative social influence and informational social influence. And here's what I want you to write down for this. Normative social influence is motivation to gain social approval. Motivation to gain social approval. Or to fit in. Motivation to gain social approval or to fit in. Whereas informational social influence is motivation to be correct or to act correctly. Motivation to be correct or to act correctly. And so both of these arise from watching what other people are doing, but when we decide how we're going to behave, when we are actually influenced by that social energy or interaction, is the difference here between normative and informational social influence is asking the question, what are you motivated by to change your behavior? And if it's normative social influence, you're motivated by wanting to gain social approval. Whereas if it's informational social influence, you're motivated by wanting to seek the truth and to be correct so that you can act correctly. Okay, so this is on that obedience study. So this is Milgram's shock study. Know that the shock study was all about obedience. So Milgram had an assistant that asked 2 participants to draw a paper out of a hat. They were instructed that one paper said student and one paper said teacher. However, what the experimental setup truly was one of these people was a Confederate. So like I said, that's someone who's in on the study and has been instructed to act a certain way to carry out the study. And the other person was an actual participant. And so one of the 2 people was a participant, the other was a Confederate, and both papers actually said teacher, so that it was guaranteed that the participant was assigned the role of the teacher, and then the Confederate just said, oh, I got the student paper, even though their paper also said teacher. The main point, what we had to do to be ethical in all of this, was to make sure that the participant was the teacher every single time, and you'll see why. So the participant was supposed to teach the student a list of word pairs and then test them on that. The participant was placed in a room where they could see the student, but the student could not see them, so like a one-way mirror situation, and they began the test. The participant was instructed to administer shocks to the student every time they got a question wrong. The shocks started out very mild and gradually increased to unbearable levels. Of course, the Confederate student was never actually shocked. They were just pretending to feel the pain for the purpose of the experiment. So again, this is why we had to make sure that it was the Confederate who got the role of the student, and it was the participant who got the role of the teacher. Otherwise, we would either have to shock the participant, which would be obviously unethical, or we'd have to turn them into a Confederate by explaining to them the true purpose of the study, right? At a very strong voltage level, the Confederate student is instructed to yell, "Get me out of here, I won't be in the experiment anymore, I refuse to go on." But there's an experimenter who's sitting behind the participant and saying things like, "Please continue, the experiment requires that you continue, it's absolutely essential that you continue," or even, "You have no other choice, you must go on." And so at this point, the question is kind of like, what would you do if you were being pushed by this, experimenter allegedly from a prestigious institution to inflict pain on someone, right? And most people think, of course, well, if someone's yelling out that they're in pain, I wouldn't continue to hurt them, right? But what's kind of shocking about this is the actual results. So when non-participants were asked what they would do if they were described, the situation, they said they would stop giving shocks as soon as they saw that the other person was in pain. But in reality, more than 60% of participants complied fully, all the way to the final 450-volt shock, which would more than likely kill a person if it was actually real. More than 60% of all the participants went all the way to the last highest voltage shock. That's crazy. And there's a little graph that kind of shows this. And so you can see when we're here at it being a very, very light shock, nothing more than, static electricity, essentially, everybody is willing to do it. Everybody's willing to inflict a little bit of pain. We start to see a tiny bit drop off, a couple percent once it starts to get stronger. We have our biggest decline between moderate and strong, where we go from, about 98 down to 80. Stays constant between strong and very strong. Falls a tiny bit more once we get to intense, but then basically levels off from intense all the way to extreme intensity, danger severe, and then XXX, whatever that means. I assume death. But notice how this line is still up here all the way at about 66 to 68% of people who are willing to go all the way to the point of actually killing someone. And that, starts to make a lot more sense when we put it in context of things like the Holocaust now, right? If this many people are willing to shock a person to death, just think, what you can convince people to do if you have some kind of agenda and political power to convince people of it. Okay, so then these 4 conditions, really important. Write these down. So this is just like on the other page when I said we were going to catalog when conformity is the highest. Now we're going to talk about when obedience is the highest. And the first factor is the authority figure is supported by a powerful or prestigious institution. So if we said that authority figure, the one who's egging you on to keep administering the shocks, was from Harvard or Yale or Stanford or something like that, then people were more likely to listen than if we had said that the authority figure was from, a community college or something like that. The next is that the authority figure is close to the person, the participant. So if the authority figure is really, really close to the participant, you feel that they are kind of exerting more force on you. Versus, there have been so many iterations of this study that people have run where they've tried to put the authority figure in a different room, or they've put the student who's receiving the shocks in the same room as the participant, so they actually have to watch them, get shocked. Of course, it's fake still, but if the authority figure is close by, that increases obedience. And if the victim is far away. So if we reverse those things and we bring the victim close by and the authority figure farther away, now obedience is less likely to occur. We're more likely to stop earlier on and refuse to administer any more shocks. And then the last one would be there are no role models for defiance. So if you're in a room where everyone else is also shocking some kind of participant or student, and they're not stopping, no one else is acting up or defying, then you just think, well, if everyone else is doing it, then I guess I should just do it too, right? Whereas if even one person defies and says, this is wrong, I don't think we should be doing this, then all of a sudden now people are willing to join in and be like, I don't think so either, right? And then there's just a few terms for you to know here. Social control refers to the power of the situation, whereas personal control refers to the power of the individual. So this is, again, just that argument we're making of situation versus disposition. Is it within the power of the situation, or is it within the power of the person? And then minority influence is, like I said, the power of one or two individuals to sway majorities. So this is kind of what I was talking about defiance, but let's give another example. Let's say that people are all in, some kind of auditorium listening to a debate, and then they ask the audience for, questions or opinions or something like that, right? And let's say that most of the room liked candidate A. They thought candidate A did the better job. But the first two people to get the microphone were people who really supported candidate B. Even though, let's say, 85% of the room is for candidate A and 15% of the room is for candidate B. But it just turned out that the first couple of people to speak were for candidate B. Now, all of a sudden, if you pull the room at this point, way more people are likely to have switched to candidate B. So that's the idea behind minority influences. Especially if the minority appears to be the majority, then they can exert even more influence in swaying what the actual majority believes. Okay. Social facilitation. So this definition leaves out more than I would like it to. But the definition says improve performance on simple or well-learned tasks in the presence of others. While that is true, that only covers half of what social facilitation speaks to. So the other half here would be decreased performance on difficult or unlearned tasks in the presence of others. So let's talk about what this means. This is saying you perform better, especially if it's on a relatively easy task, if other people are present to watch you. So you perform better on things that you are already good at when other people are watching you. For example, when people were told to wind a reel on a fishing pole as quickly as they possibly could, very easy task, right? Participants were speedier when there was another person doing the exact same task in the room with them than when they were alone doing it. So competition can sometimes also foster performance and arousal increase. And why does this happen? Well, when others observe us, our arousal increases, and arousal amplifies behavior. I use the word amplifies very specifically. I would not say arousal increases the effectiveness of behavior or improves behavior. I would never say that. I would say arousal amplifies behavior. It depends on what your most common behavior is. That's going to get amplified. So you're either going to do better on something good or on something that you're already good at, or you're going to do worse on something you're already bad at. So that speaks to this point. It works both ways. If you are typically bad at something, you'll do worse when others are watching. But if you're typically good at something, then you'll often do better when other people are watching. So expert pool players, people who are really good at pool, made 71% of their shots alone, but then 80% of the shots when they were in the presence of other people. But if you're a poor pool player, you only made 36% of your shots alone and then dropped down to making only 25% when others were watching. So again, social facilitation just says that when other people are watching, whatever our most typical behavior is gets exaggerated or amplified. So if you're already good at something, you do even better. But if you're already bad at something, you do even worse. Arousal amplifies or exacerbates behavior. Social loafing is the tendency for people in a group to exert less effort when they're pooling their efforts towards attaining a common goal than when they're held individually accountable. If you've ever done a group project, you've probably experienced, most likely been the victim of a social loafer, right? Someone who thinks, oh, if we're all working on this together, I don't really have to contribute that much. I'll just wait and see what everyone else does and then, respond off of that. And so kind of the common example that we use is we actually did an experiment where people were playing tug of war against one other person versus playing on a team. And people pull way harder on the rope when they're alone and they don't have help from other people, so they feel personally accountable, versus when they're on a team. Even when we blindfold them. So that's kind of funny. We can blindfold participants and have them pull on the rope alone both times, but they think one time they're in a group and they think the other time they're not. And they pull at very different strengths. So next to social loafing, really, I just want you to write down being lazy. Social loafing is being lazy. Choosing to just not give your full 100%. Because other people in the group are going to make up for your lack of effort. Social loafing is being lazy. When people are in a group, they don't try as hard as when they're alone. Okay, for de-individuation, I want you to write down these two words, arousal and anonymity. Arousal and anonymity. So, de-individuation is when you de-individualize, you lose your individuality. You become sort of anonymous, essentially. That's what de-individuation speaks to, is a loss of self-awareness and self-restraint in situations that foster arousal and anonymity. And so here's a good example. If someone told you to go streaking through a Baylor basketball game, you probably wouldn't do it, right? But if a group of people, say 7 or 8 people, said they were going to do it and they're all going to wear paper bags over their heads and they invited you to join, now you're much more likely to do it because of de-individuation, because you're in an arousing and exciting or thrilling situation and you are anonymous. People are not going to know who you are, right? Online bullying is a great example of this too. Other examples include being in a mob, being at a concert, being at a ball game. Anywhere where you're in a large crowd of people in some kind of arousing situation, some exciting or thrilling situation, and you feel like people are not going to be able to personally identify you. You are anonymous. And that's really kind of how riots and things get started too, if you think about it. Okay, last section. So group polarization. When you see that word polarization, if you're thinking of like molecules or something like that, polarization has to do with like being on one end of something versus the other end. Let's think of like, on Earth, you've got the North Pole and you've got the South Pole. These are the two farthest points away from one another on the globe. Right? And so when you're thinking of the word polarization, think of things moving as far away from each other as they possibly can. And so that'll make some more sense when we look at this graph. So group polarization is this idea that when you get together with people who have the same opinions as you actually come out of discussions in those groups feeling even more strongly than you did going into it. So when you discuss things with like-minded people, your pre-existing attitudes tend to increase and be strengthened. So if here, we've got a group of people who are high prejudice, right? They think that we should reinstate slavery or something horrible like that, right? High prejudice people. They're at about I don't know how this is measured, but a +3 on prejudice when they begin this experiment, so before they've discussed anything. And then once they get together with those other high prejudice people, they come out of that meeting even more prejudiced than they were going in. Now they're at a 3.4 of prejudice, right? Or prejudicial behavior expression. Versus the low prejudice groups who were, a negative 1.8 when they started, came out of their discussion at a -3, right? So they got even less prejudiced. So that's the idea behind polarization, that we get two groups of people together who agree on something. And then when they come out of those discussions, those two groups disagree with one another even more. This distance has increased from where it began. So these two groups disagree even more, if this is sort of the margin of disagreement. There we go. We've observed this with terrorist organizations. People start out with a grievance and then it escalates to being so extremely mad that you actually take extreme action against it. And then lastly, we have groupthink, and this is really just the idea that when you're in a group of people and you're all having a discussion, it kind of has to do with conformity. You don't want to be the one person to kind of ruin the harmony of the group. If everyone else seems to agree, then you don't want to be the one to make waves, right? So this is fed by overconfidence, conformity, self-justification, and group polarization. And when nobody else is dissenting, people just assume that others must agree, and nobody tries to fight against the norm or suggest other alternatives because they don't want to start an argument or disrupt the status quo. So it's all about just kind of keeping harmony, going with the flow, and not really putting that much thought into critical thinking, really. You kind of just passively go along with whatever the group is saying or doing. Okay, so make sure to turn in that worksheet and also complete the online quiz, and then happy Easter break.